Some of history's most disturbing discoveries weren't found in ancient temples or sealed tombs. They were found by accident. A farmer's tractor blade catches on something in the dirt. A boy playing behind his house digs up bronze. A metal detectorist in a remote field finds 67 pieces of something that should never have been buried that way. In each case, what surfaces isn't just an object, it's a question that nobody has fully answered. In this video, we're going through 6 of history's most unsettling archaeological chapters. A Roman soldier who rode into an ambush wearing a silver face. A king's armor that appears to call him a fool and a devil simultaneously. Ancient masks worn to become the dead. A skull hidden in a well for 85 years that rewrote the human family tree. An underground city sealed beneath a Turkish town that housed 20,000 people and left no explanation. And a civilization that vanished from one of the world's most powerful empires so completely that for centuries, nobody even knew it had existed. None of this is speculation. Every discovery in this video is documented, studied, and in most cases still debated by researchers who cannot agree on what they found. And all of it points to the same conclusion. The past is stranger, more violent, and more sophisticated than the version we've been taught. As always, the visuals are there for context, but you don't need to watch to follow along. Whether you're settling in for the night or just looking for something worth listening to, get comfortable. Because by the end of this, the way you think about what history left behind will never be quite the same. Subscribe if you haven't already. We do this every week. Now let's begin. In 9 AD, a Germanic warlord named Arminius lured 3 Roman legions into an ambush in the ground near Calarizi. Around 20,000 soldiers were slaughtered in what history would record as the Battle of Teutoberg Forest. When the news reached Emperor Augustus, he reportedly tore his clothes and cried out for weeks, "Give me back my legions." The defeat was so catastrophic, it effectively stopped Roman expansion into Germany forever. But centuries later, when archaeologists began excavating the battlefield site, one artifact stopped them cold. An iron face mask coated in silver, depicting a calm, expressionless human face. A Roman cavalry mask, found not in a parade ground or a treasury, but on an active battlefield, buried under the bones of the men who died there. Here's the problem with that. According to most historians, masks like this were never worn in battle. They were ceremonial equipment used during cavalry tournaments called the Hippica Gymnasia, elaborate theatrical events where riders would dress as Greeks, Trojans, or Amazons and stage mock combat for visiting dignitaries. The masks were beautiful, complex, and, according to the official history, completely useless in actual warfare. But the Calarizi mask was found alongside spearheads, sling bullets, sword fragments, and shield bosses. At least one Roman cavalryman rode into Teutoberg Forest wearing a silver face, and he didn't ride out. This pattern repeats across the former empire. From Syria to Algeria to the banks of the Rhine, cavalry masks have turned up in contexts that don't fit the ceremonial explanation. The Ribchester helmet, discovered in 1796 by a boy playing behind his house in Lancaster, was buried alongside more than 30 other pieces of cavalry equipment near a Roman fort abandoned 16 centuries earlier. Nobody knows who buried it or why. The mask depicts a young man's face, with curls that twist into serpent heads, staring out with the same blank, unsettling calm as the face found at Calarizi. The Crosby-Garrett helmet, found in 2010 by a metal detectorist in a remote Cumbrian hamlet, is stranger still. It arrived in 67 pieces. The visor had been placed face down. The helmet had been deliberately folded before burial, as though someone wanted to destroy it or offer it to something underground. It now sits in a private collection after selling at auction for nearly £2.3 million, making formal study nearly impossible. The masks almost always depict the same thing: a young, idealized face, smooth, calm, blank. Some are female, with elaborate hairstyles made from delicate chains. A few have tiny glass rings set into the eyes to simulate an iris. They stare with an expression that isn't quite human. Researchers who built and tested replicas discovered something that complicated the official narrative further. The eye holes provide a workable field of vision. Breathing isn't restricted. The metal quality matches standard combat helmets of the period. A person wearing one of these masks could see, move, and fight without significant impairment. Which raises the question that nobody has satisfactorily answered. If these masks function perfectly well in battle, and at least one was found on a battlefield among the weapons and armor of men who died fighting, then why do we keep insisting they were only for show? The honest answer is we don't know. We've inherited an assumption about what they were for, and the physical evidence keeps pushing against it. The silver face in the Teutoberg Forest was the property of a man who died in one of Rome's worst military disasters. Whatever he believed that mask would do for him in battle, it wasn't enough. But the fact that he wore it there at all suggests the story we've been telling about these objects is incomplete. In 1514, a ship arrived in England carrying a diplomatic gift from the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I to his new ally, King Henry VIII. Inside was a full suit of armor built by Konrad Zeusenhofe, one of the finest armorers alive in Europe. As a demonstration of political goodwill and shared military ambition, it was conventional enough. But then there was the helmet. The face on it has wrinkles around the eyes, stubble on the chin, a drip beneath the nose. The mouth is frozen in a toothy grimace. A pair of copper spectacles sit on the bridge of the nose, and rising from either side of the head, two spiraling ram's horns, crafted from sheet iron, riveted into position. It is one of the strangest objects ever commissioned for a monarch, and after 5 centuries, nobody has fully agreed on what it means. The face itself appears to be modeled on a court jester, a playing card from the same period, designed by the artist Peter Flottner, shows a figure called the Knave of Bells, a fool wearing spectacles. The resemblance to the helmet is immediate and unmistakable. For a long time, scholars believed the helmet had belonged to Henry's court fool, Will Somers. But Somers didn't join the royal household until 1525. The armor arrived 11 years before that, eliminating him as the connection. So the face of a fool was sent to a king as a gift from an emperor. And then there are the horns. In the 16th century, ram's horns carried 2 meanings in Western European symbolism. They represented either the devil or a man whose wife had been unfaithful. Neither interpretation is a compliment to send to a newly crowned king. The diplomatic implications of either reading are staggering, which is why the royal armories now believe the horns weren't part of the original gift at all. Their attachment is crude, inconsistent with Zeusenhofer's work on the rest of the helmet. The horns themselves are beautifully made, with traces of gilding that mimic natural growth rings. But the method of fixing them to the helmet doesn't match. They appear to have been added later by a different craftsman with a different skill set. The horns first appear in a written description of the helmet in 1547, the year Henry VIII died. Someone added devil horns to the king's fool helmet, either during the final year of his reign or after his death. Who did it remains unknown. Why also remains unknown. After the English Civil War, the rest of the armor was likely melted down for scrap. The helmet survived, probably because it was too bizarre to repurpose. It sits today in the Tournament Gallery at the Royal Armouries Museum in Leeds, where it has become the institution's symbol, appearing on road signs throughout the city. A helmet with the face of a fool and the horns of the devil, commissioned by an emperor for a king. modified by an unknown hand in the year a monarch died. 5 centuries of scholarship have not produced a satisfying explanation for any of it. A team of archaeologists excavating the Kamarka region of southern Siberia opens a crypt sealed beneath logs and stone. The chamber is enormous, 40 square meters. Inside are the remains of 30 adults. But the bodies aren't bodies, they're dummies. Life-sized mannequins made of leather stuffed with tightly twisted grass. Inside each one, right where the stomach would be, sits a small leather pouch. Inside the pouch, charred human bones. And on each face, a mask. The masks are made from gypsum, molded directly onto the dead person's face within hours of death, while the features were still distinct. Some are painted white with red spirals. Others are red with black stripes. Men are differentiated from women. Each one captures the specific face of the person who died. They are portraits, made from the dead themselves. They belong to the Tashtik, a warrior culture that dominated southern Siberia from roughly the 1st century to the 7th century AD. When someone died, the body was cremated. The bones were placed inside a leather effigy constructed to match the dead person's proportions. Miniature replicas of swords, arrows, and quivers were laid alongside it. The gypsum mask went on last. Then, the effigy was placed inside a communal crypt where it remained for months, sometimes years, as the family performed commemorative rituals and funeral feasts. When the cycle of mourning was complete, the entire crypt was burned. In 1969, archaeologist Leonid Kislasov excavated a tomb at the Oglokty burial ground and found something unexpected. One of the effigies contained a genuine mummy rather than cremated remains. CT scanning decades later revealed the face beneath the painted mask. A young man, 25 to 30 years old, with reddish-brown hair. A long suture ran from his left eye to his ear. Someone had stitched the wound shut, almost certainly after death. The stitching was part of the burial preparation. They could not send him into the afterlife with a damaged face, so they repaired it before applying the mask. His skull had also been trepanned, a hole chiseled into the temporal bone to remove the brain, all part of the ritual preparation. The mask over his face was aggressive. Black stripes, red background, teeth visible through cracked plaster. But the CT scan revealed something that made the curator pause. Beneath the painted aggression was, in her words, the face of a calmly sleeping person. Genetic studies added a final layer of strangeness. Despite living deep in Siberia, the individuals tested carried primarily Western European DNA, shaped by Scythian and Sarmatian ancestry. Light hair, often blue eyes, in a region associated with East Asian populations. The Tashtik were a convergence of worlds, and by the 7th century, Turkic migration swept through and absorbed them entirely. They disappeared. But 26 fully intact masks survive, alongside fragments of nearly 200 more. They sit in Russian museums, staring out with the faces of people no surviving civilization remembers by name. In 1970, a farmer plowing a field in the Judean hills catches something with his tractor blade. He stops and digs it out. A face stares back at him. Hollow eyes, bared teeth, a jaw frozen open in what looks like a silent scream. He has no idea what he's holding. The mask eventually reaches Moshe Dayan, Israel's defense minister and obsessive antiquities collector, who keeps it displayed beside his chair, as though the thing is watching him work. It takes scientists more than a decade to understand what it actually is. The mask is roughly 9,000 years old, carved from limestone. It dates to the pre-pottery Neolithic. a period when humanity was just beginning to learn how to farm. And it is one of only 16 known stone masks from this era on the entire planet, almost all of them found within a small stretch of hills and desert south of Jerusalem. Researchers at the Israel Museum spent a decade studying them, building 3D models, analyzing mineral composition, tracing the stone back to specific quarry locations. The findings all converged on one conclusion. These are not portraits of the living. They are portraits of the dead. The shape and dimensions match human skulls. The sunken cheeks, the prominent temples, the exposed teeth. They are sculpted to look like what a face becomes after death. And they were designed to be worn. Computer analysis confirmed it. The eye holes align with a living person's field of vision. The weight, between 1 and 2 kilograms, is balanced for wear. A person can strap one of these to their face, look through the sockets, and become someone else, specifically a dead ancestor. In 1983, archaeologists excavating a small cave in the Judean desert called Nahal Hemar found fragments of 2 more masks. One still had human hair attached, a mustache and a beard, preserved for 9,000 years in the dry desert air. The cave also held decorated skulls coated in asphalt, bone figurines, flint knives, and the partial remains of 23 people, mostly just skulls. These were the first farmers. They had no writing, no legal documents, no contracts. The only proof of a claim to land was ancestry. Your grandfather worked this soil, his father before him. The dead were not simply remembered, they were the foundation of everything, the original title deed to the world. Researchers believe the masks were worn in ceremonies where a living person became the vessel for an ancestor's spirit, stepping back while the dead one looked out through the stone at the land they used to work. The holes along the edges held straps. The weight is right for sustained wearing. The eye holes work. 9,000 years ago, in the hills south of Jerusalem, someone strapped the carved limestone face of their grandfather onto their own face and stood before their community as a bridge between the living and the dead. In 1963, a man renovating his basement in the town of Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, Turkey, knocks down a wall expecting more storage space. Instead, he finds a hidden room, then a corridor, then a stairwell, then a shaft dropping so far it swallows the beam of his flashlight. Within days, locals realized the impossible. Their homes were sitting on the roof of an underground city. Derinkuyu descends 18 known levels into the volcanic rock, reaching a depth of roughly 85 meters, equivalent to a 28-story building inverted below the earth. It was carved entirely by hand from soft volcanic tuff, using tools no more sophisticated than iron picks and wooden mallets. It contains stables, schools, chapels, wineries, kitchens, armories, and residential neighborhoods connected by a maze of tunnels so narrow that an attacking force would have to approach single file. Massive circular stone doors, weighing up to half a ton, could be rolled into place from the inside, each with a central hole just large enough to thrust a spear through at anyone attempting to push from the other side. The deeper you go, the more deliberately engineered it becomes. A 55-meter ventilation shaft funneled fresh air throughout all 18 levels and doubled as a well, with the critical detail that access could be cut off from the surface to prevent contamination during a siege. More than 50 smaller ventilation shafts threaded upward to the fields above, disguised as ordinary pits and courtyards. Each level could isolate itself from the others. The lowest floors held churches, classrooms, and communal gathering halls. The wine presses confirm that this was never conceived as a short-term emergency shelter. You don't carve a grape treading pit and rows of ceramic storage vessels into bedrock if you're planning to be underground for a week. The builders designed for months, possibly longer. The oldest confirmed artifacts suggest construction beginning around the 8th century BC, associated with the Phrygians. But there are scholars who argue the timeline extends further, possibly into the Bronze Age, possibly coinciding with periods of catastrophic climate instability that would have made the surface genuinely uninhabitable for extended periods. And Derinkuyu is not alone. Over 200 underground cities and complexes have been identified across Cappadocia. Several appear to be connected by tunnels running for kilometers between them, creating a subterranean network of staggering scale. One discovered in 2015 beneath a hilltop fortress, maybe even larger than Derinkuyu, found only because construction equipment kept collapsing into empty space. The most haunting question is the one that no historical record has answered. What were they hiding from? Invaders are the conventional explanation, and the defensive architecture supports it. But the scale of the preparation, the wineries, the schools, the churches, the permanent infrastructure of an underground civilization suggests something beyond simple military defense. The people who built Derinkuyu were preparing for a world where the surface itself was not survivable. What they feared enough to carve an entire city into the bedrock of a Turkish hillside, we do not know. In 1986, workers at a brick factory in the Sichuan province of China struck something unexpected in the soil: a sacrificial pit. Then a second one. Between them, over 1,500 objects, many showing signs of ritualistic burning, dating back more than 3,000 years. What emerged from those pits dismantled everything archaeologists thought they knew about Bronze Age China. The bronze masks have bulging eyes that protrude 10 centimeters from the face on tubes of metal. The pupils are not irises, they are cylinders. Nothing in the known artistic tradition of ancient China resembles them. The largest standing bronze figure ever found in China was recovered here, 2.6 meters tall, weighing nearly 200 kilograms, its hands positioned as though holding something now lost, dressed in 3 layers of meticulously detailed clothing. Gold masks were placed over the faces of bronze heads. Elephant tusks, hundreds of them, were layered across the offerings. Sacred trees, cast in bronze, reached nearly 4 meters high, their branches carrying figures of birds that have no parallel in Chinese mythology. And there are no written records. None. Not a single inscription naming a king, recording a ritual, explaining a symbol, or acknowledging that San Xingdui existed at all. In a culture as meticulous about documentation as ancient China, this silence is itself a mystery. Either the people of San Xingdui had no writing system, or every record they made was destroyed so completely that nothing survived. The absence of text leaves archaeologists with no direct link between this city and any known Chinese civilization. San Xingdui was substantial. At its peak, it was encircled by walls 8 to 10 meters high and 20 meters thick, enclosing an area of 3.6 square kilometers. It had a planned urban layout, with distinct residential, industrial, and religious districts, organized along a central axis. It flourished while Rome was centuries from existing. And then, around 1000 BC, it was abandoned. The sacrificial pits were filled, the objects burned or broken, and the city was sealed. The leading theory involves a massive earthquake in 1099 BC that altered the course of local rivers, triggering floods or droughts that made the site uninhabitable. but there is no direct evidence of natural catastrophe in the archaeological record. The city wasn't destroyed, it was closed. The difference matters, because closing requires a decision. Someone chose to bury these objects, burn them, seal the pits, and leave. That decision and the reasons behind it have never been explained. Between 2020 and 2022 alone, new excavations added more than 13,000 artifacts to the record, including bronze chests, jade boxes, and gold ornaments that had no precedent anywhere in the ancient world. Each new dig expands the mystery rather than resolving it. Sanxingdui was not a minor settlement or a regional curiosity. It was one of the most sophisticated urban centers of the Bronze Age, operating simultaneously with the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, producing metalwork of a complexity and strangeness that has no parallel anywhere on Earth. And nobody knew it existed until a factory worker's shovel broke through the surface in 1986. Pull them together, and the picture that forms is deeply uncomfortable. A Roman soldier wore a silver ceremonial face into a military ambush and died there, suggesting either that the official explanation of those masks is wrong, or that war is stranger and more ritualistic than we want to admit. A king received a helmet depicting a fool and a devil from his most important ally. Then, someone added horns in the year he died, and nobody has explained any part of it in 5 centuries. A warrior culture in Siberia cremated their dead, rebuilt them as leather mannequins with gypsum faces, and kept them in crypts for years before burning everything, then vanished without descendants who remember their names. Neolithic farmers 9,000 years ago carved limestone death masks and wore them to become their ancestors in a ritual that preserved claims to land at a time when ancestry was the only law. An entire city sealed beneath a Turkish town housed 20,000 people underground for months at a time and never explained in any surviving record what they were hiding from. And a Bronze Age civilization in China produced some of the most extraordinary metalwork ever found, built a major urban center that stood for centuries, then deliberately sealed it and walked away, leaving no writing, no explanation, and no memory that survived into any subsequent culture. These aren't footnotes. These are chapters that the standard history of humanity has either ignored, misread, or not yet found the framework to explain. The past is not a finished document. It is an ongoing excavation, and the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Now it's your turn. Which of these 6 hit hardest? And if you had to guess what's still sitting undiscovered beneath some ordinary field or town somewhere in the world, drop it in the comments below. We read all of them. Click the video on screen now to keep going. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And as always, until next time, stay curious.